In Hollywood, every bright light casts a shadow, and behind the glamour lies a truth few dare to face. Some stars walk into operating rooms expecting hope, healing, or just a little more time, only to step into their final chapter. Tonight, we uncover the haunting final hours of 15 legendary names whose lives were claimed not by fame, but by fate and the surgeon's knife. Number 1. Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher had spent her entire life fighting storms, fame, pressure, illness, and the weight of being an icon to millions. But in December 2016, the battle became one she could no longer win. During a flight from London to Los Angeles, she went into cardiac arrest, the culmination of years of heart complications and repeated medical interventions, including prior surgical procedures intended to stabilize her fragile health. Passengers watched in horror as paramedics performed CPR for nearly 15 minutes, fighting desperately to keep her alive until the plane landed. At Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center, doctors continued the struggle. Her heart had briefly restarted, but her body, worn down by years of respiratory issues and cardiac stress, was slipping away. After days on life support, her organs began to fail. Complications tied to a heart system weakened long before that flight. When she passed, the world mourned the woman who had brought Princess Leia to life, a symbol of rebellion, courage, and humanity. What many didn't know was how many quiet medical battles she had endured away from the cameras, how many surgeries, treatments, and interventions she had survived before that final collapse. Her death became a reminder that even the strongest heroes carry wounds no one sees, and sometimes the greatest fight happens far from the spotlight. Number 2. Brittany Murphy. Brittany Murphy's final days were a whirlwind of pain, confusion, and quiet desperation behind the walls of her Hollywood Hills home. On December 20, 2009, the 32-year-old actress collapsed in her bathroom, her body overwhelmed by a storm of medical complications. What appeared at first to be a sudden tragedy was, in truth, the final consequence of a long and hidden struggle. In the weeks leading up to her death, Brittany had been battling pneumonia, severe anemia, and intense weakness, conditions that doctors later said often require urgent medical intervention or surgery if they worsened. Instead, she had remained at home, relying on a cocktail of prescription medications meant to ease her symptoms, but ultimately masking their danger. When paramedics arrived, they found her barely conscious. During the frantic ride to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, her heart stopped. Doctors attempted to revive her, preparing for emergency procedures that might stabilize her fragile lungs, but her body was already shutting down. At 10:04 a.m., Brittany Murphy was pronounced dead. The autopsy revealed the depth of her illness: a severe respiratory infection, profound anemia, and complications so advanced that even aggressive intervention might not have saved her. Fans struggled to understand how a young, vibrant actress whose smile lit up films like Clueless and 8 Mile could be taken so abruptly. But behind her charm and talent had been years of private battles, health issues, drastic weight changes, anxiety, and a lifestyle that left her vulnerable to medical crises. Her death became one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking warnings about untreated illness and the dangers of avoiding critical care. Brittany's final hours reflected a quiet plea for help, lost beneath the noise of Hollywood's expectations until it was too late. Number 3. Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve had spent nearly a decade fighting for every breath, every word, and every small victory his paralyzed body would allow. Long after the 1995 horseback riding accident that left him unable to move from the neck down, he continued to undergo surgeries meant to stabilize infections, close wounds, and support his fragile respiratory system. In early October 2004, doctors performed another routine procedure, one meant to prevent a deep wound from worsening, a common and dangerous complication for paralyzed patients who spend years in wheelchairs and hospital beds. It was supposed to help him recover, not push him toward the end. At first, everything seemed stable. He spoke calmly with his wife, Dana, and his doctors noted improvement. But within hours, a severe bacterial infection began spreading through his bloodstream. His temperature spiked, his blood pressure fell, and soon his organs were fighting a silent, unstoppable war. On the evening of October 10th, Christopher went into cardiac arrest. Doctors tried to revive him, but the infection, born from the very complications his surgery was meant to prevent, had already overwhelmed his body. He slipped away quietly, with Dana holding his hand, just as she had through every step of his long fight. News of his death broke with disbelief. To millions, he was not just Superman, but a real-life symbol of hope, courage, and breathtaking resilience. Even after paralysis, he had continued to direct films, speak publicly, and advocate fiercely for medical research that could one day restore movement to those like him. His determination had moved nations, inspired scientists, and touched everyone who watched him redefine what strength truly meant. In the end, it was not the accident itself that claimed him, but the hidden fragility of a body endlessly injured by it. A reminder that even heroes cannot outrun the quiet dangers that follow trauma. Yet Christopher Reeve's legacy remains unbreakable, still lifting others long after his final breath. Number 4. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen had always lived on the edge. Speed, danger, and rebellion were the pulse of his life. But by 1980, the king of cool was fighting a very different enemy, mesothelioma, an aggressive cancer linked to asbestos exposure. He believed it came from years of filming action scenes, repairing old cars, and breathing in dust on movie sets. American doctors refused to operate, warning that surgery offered little hope. But McQueen was never a man who accepted limits. If the medical system said no, he went looking for someone who would say yes. In October 1980, he traveled to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, seeking experimental treatments and a surgeon willing to attempt the impossible. On November 7th, he was wheeled into the operating room for a risky procedure to remove massive tumors pressing against his neck and abdomen. Friends later said he believed if he could just survive the surgery, he might gain a few more months, maybe enough time to find a miracle. But his body, ravaged by cancer and weakened by unconventional therapies, had little strength left. The operation lasted hours. When the anesthesia began to fade, Steve's pulse faltered. His heart, already fighting against overwhelming internal damage, gave out. At 3:45 a.m., the man who had outrun bullets, motorcycles, explosions, and his own haunted past finally stopped breathing. Outside the small clinic, a handful of fans waited for news, unaware they were witnessing the last chapter of a Hollywood legend. When the world learned of his death, grief mixed with disbelief. Steve McQueen had always seemed untouchable, too tough, too wild, too alive to simply disappear on an operating table in a distant city. But his final hours revealed a truth he had long hidden. Behind that cool exterior was a man desperate for more time, more chances, more life. His passing became one of Hollywood's most haunting medical tragedies, a story of courage, defiance, and a hero who kept fighting long after hope had begun to fade. Number 5. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball had spent a lifetime making the world laugh, but her final days unfolded far from the bright lights of any studio. In April 1989, just 8 days after undergoing major heart surgery to repair her aorta and replace a failing valve, she suddenly awoke with sharp, tearing chest pain. The 77-year-old icon was rushed back to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where a team of doctors immediately surrounded her bedside. The surgery had been declared a success, and millions believed she was recovering. But inside her chest, the weakened artery they had tried to save was beginning to fail in silence. Monitors blared as Lucille struggled to breathe. Doctors worked frantically, initiating emergency measures to stabilize her failing heart, but the repaired artery ruptured without warning. A massive internal bleed followed. In seconds, the energy that had carried decades of comedy, love, and fierce ambition began slipping away. At 4:47 a.m., Lucille Ball was pronounced dead. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Television networks interrupted broadcasts, and fans gathered outside the hospital with flowers, tears, and disbelief etched across their faces. The woman who had filled living rooms with joy had vanished in a place defined by sterile walls and surgical precision. In truth, Lucille had lived for years with a fragile heart, one worn down by exhaustion, stress, and a lifetime spent giving more than she took. Doctors had warned her to slow down, but she only knew how to push forward. Ironically, her last hours mirrored the dramatic intensity she once brought to the screen. Sudden, emotional, unforgettable. After her passing, medical experts reflected on how dangerous aortic conditions can be for aging patients, even after seemingly successful surgery. Her death became a somber reminder that no amount of fame or laughter can shield a person from the quiet, unforgiving nature of the human body. Yet, Lucille Ball's legacy remains untouched. The world still laughs because she lived, even if her final moments revealed a fragile truth behind a lifetime of brilliance. Number 6. Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers walked into the Yorkville Endoscopy Clinic on the morning of August 28, 2014, expecting nothing more than a routine check of her vocal cords, a simple outpatient procedure she had done before. At 81, she was still working non-stop, performing stand-up shows, filming television, and living with the same electric energy that had pushed her career for decades. No one, not even Joan herself, imagined that within minutes her life would slip into irreversible danger. During the procedure, doctors performed a laryngoscopy and upper endoscopy under sedation, monitoring her breathing and heart rate. At least, they were supposed to. As the examination continued, Joan's oxygen levels began to fall, a silent red flag that went unnoticed until it was too late. By the time staff realized she was in distress, her breathing had nearly stopped. Her heart followed moments later. Paramedics rushed her to Mount Sinai Hospital, where doctors managed to restart her heart, but the damage had already been done. A lack of oxygen had triggered severe brain injury, leaving her unconscious and dependent on machines to keep her alive. For days, her daughter Melissa stayed beside her, hoping for a miracle. But the truth slowly revealed itself. The woman who had spent her life commanding stages and dominating screens with razor-sharp humor was fading. On September 4th, Joan Rivers was pronounced dead. The official cause was a catastrophic brain injury following a respiratory and cardiac arrest, events tied directly to mistakes made during the procedure. The world reacted in shock. Joan had performed a comedy show the night before, full of energy and bite, proving once again that age meant nothing to her. Fans lined the streets of New York with flowers and handwritten notes, their laughter replaced by quiet grief. Investigations later uncovered multiple errors at the clinic: improper monitoring, unauthorized actions during the procedure, and a level of negligence that shook the medical community. Her death became a turning point, forcing clinics nationwide to reassess safety standards even for what they considered minor surgeries. But beyond the tragedy, Joan Rivers left behind a legacy bigger than any scandal or medical failure. She was a pioneer, a woman who tore through Hollywood's barriers with unapologetic honesty, defiant humor, and relentless courage. Even her death revealed a truth she had lived by. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and never guaranteed, not even for legends. Number 7. Farrah Fawcett. Farrah Fawcett had always seemed larger than life, golden, glowing, and carried by a kind of effortless radiance that defined an entire era of Hollywood. But behind that iconic smile was a woman waging a battle far harsher than anything the cameras ever revealed. After being diagnosed with anal cancer in 2006, Farah sought every form of treatment she could find, from advanced therapies in Germany to experimental surgical procedures meant to remove tumors and slow the disease's relentless spread. Each operation chipped away at her strength, leaving her immune system more fragile, her body more exhausted. By early 2009, complications began to multiply. Internal bleeding, severe pain, and new tumors left her doctors with few options. In her final days at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica, Farah underwent another procedure, one meant not to cure, but to give her a little more time. Instead, her weakened body could no longer recover from the intervention. On June 25, 2009, with Ryan O'Neal holding her hand, she slipped away quietly. For a moment, the world paused. Then, only hours later, Michael Jackson died, and Farah's passing was overshadowed by a global media storm. Yet for millions who had loved her since her Charlie's Angels days, the grief remained deep and personal. Farrah Fawcett had not simply been a star, she had been a symbol of the 1970s, a face so iconic that her red swimsuit poster became the most famous image of its time. But her later years showed something even more powerful than beauty or fame: unbreakable will. Even as she endured painful treatments, Farrah chose transparency. She documented her illness in Farrah's Story, revealing the raw, unvarnished truth of cancer, the fear, the trauma, the surgeries, and the fleeting moments of hope. Her courage sparked conversations about patient dignity, medical innovation, and the human cost of fighting for life. In the end, it wasn't the glamour or the fame that defined Farrah Fawcett. It was the strength she found when everything else was being stripped away. Her battle, her bravery, and her final moments became a testament to the fragile resilience of the human spirit. Number 8. Bill Paxton. Bill Paxton had stared down tornadoes, vampires, and even an alien queen on screen, but none of those dangers compared to what he faced in a quiet Los Angeles hospital room in February 2017. At 61, he was scheduled for a surgery he hoped would save his life, an operation to repair an aortic aneurysm and replace a damaged heart valve. The risks were real, but Bill had lived with heart problems since childhood, and this surgery felt like a chance to finally fix the condition that had shadowed him for years. He told friends he was nervous but hopeful. He wanted more time, with his children, with his wife, with the films he still dreamed of making. The operation on February 14th appeared successful at first. Doctors were optimistic. Bill was stable, awake, even talking. But over the next several days, subtle complications began to surface. Small blood clots forming, pressure shifts, signs that his recovering heart was struggling. On February 25th, the worst happened. A clot traveled to his brain, triggering a massive stroke. Medical teams rushed to intervene, preparing emergency measures, but his condition deteriorated too quickly. Surrounded by his family, Bill Paxton slipped away. The shock that followed rippled through Hollywood. Co-stars and directors mourned the loss of not just a talented actor, but a warm, humble, deeply genuine man. James Cameron called him one of the most alive people I ever met. Fans shared memories of his unmistakable charm, the wide grin, the soft Texas voice, the subtle humanity he brought to every role. Weeks later, news broke that Bill's family had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hospital and surgeon, claiming negligence during the procedure. The case ignited national debates about surgical risk, patient safety, and the unseen dangers behind even well-planned operations. Though the details of the settlement remained private, the tragedy underscored how fragile the line is between life and loss, even for those surrounded by the best care. Bill Paxton had spent his career playing fearless heroes, men who ran toward danger, who fought the impossible, who survived against all odds. But in the end, it was a quiet medical complication that claimed him. His legacy remains etched in the films he left behind, and in the memories of a man whose heart, both literally and figuratively, carried him farther than most ever dream. Number 9. John Ritter. John Ritter had spent his life bringing warmth and laughter to millions, the kind of actor whose presence made every room feel lighter. But on the evening of September 11, 2003, the joy he carried so naturally was replaced by sudden fear. While rehearsing on the set of his sitcom 8 Simple Rules, John collapsed without warning. Crew members rushed to his side, believing he was having a heart attack. Within minutes, he was taken across the street to Providence St. Joseph Medical Center, where a team of doctors prepared for emergency intervention. But the truth was far more deadly than a heart attack. Tests revealed that John was suffering from an aortic dissection, a tear in the body's largest artery, one of the most catastrophic medical emergencies a person can face. Surgeons quickly moved him into the operating room, hoping to repair the tear before it ruptured completely. As they worked, John's heart grew weaker. Despite desperate attempts to restart it, he never regained consciousness. At 10:48 p.m., he was pronounced dead at just 54 years old. The news stunned the nation. John Ritter had been a familiar presence for decades, from his unforgettable role as Jack Tripper in Three's Company to the kind, lovable father he portrayed in 8 Simple Rules. His charm felt timeless, and his death felt impossibly sudden. Fans, co-stars, and comedians across the country mourned him not just as an actor, but as a man whose kindness matched his talent. In the months that followed, painful truths emerged. John's aortic dissection had been initially misdiagnosed as a heart attack, costing precious minutes that might have made a difference. His wife, Amy Yazbek, filed lawsuits against the hospital and multiple doctors, not out of anger, but out of a desperate hope that raising awareness could save others. Her advocacy helped bring national attention to the signs of aortic emergencies and the importance of rapid, accurate diagnosis. John Ritter's legacy lives on in the laughter he gave so freely. But his final hours revealed something deeper: the fragility that hides behind even the brightest spirits. His story remains one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking reminders that life can change in a single minute, even for those who spend their lives making the world smile. Number 10. Richard Harris. Richard Harris had always been larger than life, fiery, rebellious, poetic, and utterly unforgettable. But by the autumn of 2002, the Irish actor who had dominated both stage and screen for decades was fighting an internal battle far removed from the characters who had made him famous. After being diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, Harris underwent treatments to control the disease. When complications struck his chest and breathing, doctors determined that surgery was necessary to ease the pressure and stabilize his condition. It was a difficult decision, but Harris faced it with the same boldness that had defined every chapter of his career. The procedure took place at University College Hospital in London. At first, it seemed to help. But the combination of cancer, infection, and the strain of surgery pushed his weakened body to the brink. Over the next few days, his condition deteriorated. He slipped in and out of consciousness, surrounded by family who prayed for even a flicker of the old fire they knew so well. On October 25, 2002, his heart finally gave out. He was 72. The news hit Hollywood and the United Kingdom like a shockwave. For many, Harris was not just an actor, he was a force. Fans remembered him charging through Camelot, standing defiant in A Man Called Horse, and, in his final years, embodying Professor Albus Dumbledore with warm authority. His voice, deep, commanding, unmistakable, had shaped generations of cinema. In the days before his death, Harris still joked with nurses, asking for a pint of Guinness and teasing visitors as if he were backstage at a theater instead of lying in a hospital bed. His humor, stubbornness, and unpredictability had always been part of his charm. Even as his body weakened, his spirit refused to fade. Tributes poured in after his passing. Politicians, playwrights, actors, and directors shared stories of his brilliance. His funeral drew crowds who admired not only his talent, but his unapologetic authenticity. Richard Harris had lived like a storm, wild, passionate, and unforgettable. And in the end, it wasn't age or fame that claimed him, but the fragile reality of the human body after surgery, a reminder that even legends must face their final curtain. His voice may be gone, but the echo of his presence remains, etched in film, in memory, and in every story that still speaks his name. Number 11. James Avery. James Avery was the kind of actor whose presence filled a room long before he spoke. His deep voice, commanding stature, and warm spirit made him unforgettable to millions, most famously as Uncle Phil in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But behind that strength was a man whose health had been quietly deteriorating for years. By late 2013, Avery's heart problems had worsened to the point that doctors recommended open-heart surgery. It was his best chance at stabilizing the issues that had silently followed him for so long. The procedure took place in December at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. At first, everything seemed routine. The operation was completed, the incisions closed, and doctors were hopeful that he would recover. But in the days that followed, complications began to surface: an infection, organ stress, and the dangerous imbalance that can follow major heart surgery, especially in older patients. On December 31st, the situation became critical. Multiple organs began to fail, and despite every attempt to stabilize him, James Avery took his final breath with his wife, Barbara, holding his hand. When the news broke, Hollywood mourned as though it had lost a family member. Will Smith called him a mentor and a second father. The cast reunited privately to honor the man whose patience, humor, and kindness had shaped their lives both on and off camera. Fans around the world posted memories, quotes, and scenes that had become part of their childhoods. Moments where Avery's powerful monologues carried lessons about life, dignity, and love. Long before television fame, Avery had served in the Navy during the Vietnam War, written poetry, studied the arts, and poured his heart into theater. He was a Shakespearean actor, a teacher, a voice that could shift from thunderous authority to quiet compassion in a single breath. Off-screen, he was known as gentle, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to the craft of storytelling. His death after surgery was a painful reminder of how fragile the human body becomes with age, even for someone who seemed so unwavering. Yet the legacy he left behind, the wisdom, the strength, the love embedded in his performances, remains unshakable. James Avery was more than a character on a screen. He was a presence, a force, and a memory that will outlive the tragedy of his final days. Number 12. Dana Plato. Dana Plato's life had always been lived under a spotlight she never asked for. As a child star on Different Strokes, she became instantly recognizable, her shy smile and soft voice turning her into one of television's most beloved young faces. But fame arrived early, and with it came pressures she was far too young to understand. As the years passed, Dana struggled with personal turmoil, financial hardship, and a long history of medical complications that slowly consumed her life behind closed doors. In the months leading up to her death in May 1999, Dana had undergone a surgical procedure to treat a recurring medical problem, one that left her in chronic pain and dependent on prescription medication to function. She tried to hide how much she was hurting, but friends later said she often winced when she moved, the lingering effects of the procedure making daily life a fight. During a visit to her fiancé's home in Moore, Oklahoma, her pain worsened. She took medication that had been prescribed to manage her post-surgical discomfort, hoping it would finally let her sleep. But her weakened body, already exhausted from years of medical issues and emotional strain, could not withstand the drug's effects. In the early morning hours of May 8th, Dana slipped into unconsciousness. Paramedics tried to revive her, but it was too late. The combination of medication and her fragile state after surgery had pushed her beyond recovery. She was just 34. The news broke hearts across the country. Fans who had grown up watching her felt they had lost someone they knew. Co-stars mourned publicly, speaking of a young woman who had been kind, gentle, and easily overwhelmed by the demands placed on her. In the press, much was said about her struggles, but those closest to her spoke instead about her bravery, her attempts to rebuild her life, her efforts to confront her medical problems, and her dream of returning to acting. Dana Plato's death remains one of Hollywood's most painful reminders of how early fame can amplify every wound, every illness, every quiet cry for help. She did not die from scandal or chaos, but from the silent, devastating consequences of pain, physical, emotional, and medical, that she had carried for far too long. Number 13. Bill Bixby. Bill Bixby had always projected calm, control, and quiet strength, traits that carried him through beloved roles in The Incredible Hulk, My Favorite Martian, and countless television dramas. But behind that steady presence was a man fighting a long, private battle. In the early 1990s, Bixby was diagnosed with prostate cancer, a disease that advanced faster than anyone expected. Determined to keep working, he continued acting and directing even as the illness began to erode his health, pushing his body into a cycle of treatments, hospitalizations, and multiple medical interventions, including surgical procedures meant to slow the cancer's spread. As his condition deteriorated, doctors attempted additional forms of treatment, hoping to extend his time. But his body, weakened by months of aggressive therapies, struggled to recover from every procedure. In the final weeks of his life, Bixby experienced complications that often follow late-stage cancer surgeries: respiratory distress, organ strain, and a cascade of internal problems that medicine could no longer control. On November 21, 1993, with close friends by his side, Bill Bixby slipped away at the hospital. He was only 59. News of his death struck Hollywood with a profound sadness. Fans remembered him as the gentle scientist David Banner, his eyes filled with sorrow and humanity, an image that would forever define the heart of the Hulk series. Colleagues spoke about his professionalism, his kindness, and the quiet resilience that had carried him through the most painful chapter of his life. Even as cancer ravaged his body, Bill continued directing episodes of Blossom, refusing to let illness steal the creativity that had always driven him. What made his death so tragic was not just the loss, but the struggle behind it. The surgeries, the procedures, the desperate attempts to fight back, all of them reflected a man who refused to surrender. Bill Bixby's final battle was fought far from the spotlight, in hospital rooms and quiet corridors, where he faced each setback with dignity. In the end, he left behind not just memorable characters, but a legacy of perseverance, proof that true courage often takes place where no cameras are rolling. Number 14. Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman's life had been defined by contrasts: extraordinary fame and profound struggle, success and heartbreak, bright laughter and quiet suffering. As a child star on Different Strokes, he became one of the most recognizable faces on television. But behind his charm and quick wit was a fragile body shaped by chronic kidney disease. From the time he was a small child, Gary endured countless medical procedures, including multiple kidney transplants and frequent dialysis. Each surgery saved his life, but each one also left him weaker, his body more vulnerable to complications. By 2010, years of health problems had taken a heavy toll. After experiencing severe seizures and mounting physical difficulties, Gary fell at his Utah home on May 26, suffering a head injury that required urgent medical intervention. He was rushed to the hospital, where scans revealed an intracranial hemorrhage, bleeding inside the skull that often requires emergency surgery. Doctors prepared him for the procedure, hoping to relieve the pressure and prevent further damage. But his condition deteriorated too quickly. The bleeding spread, his consciousness faded, and soon he was placed on life support. Complications from his long medical history, anemia, weakened organs, and the cumulative effects of decades of surgeries made recovery nearly impossible. On May 28, Gary Coleman was removed from life support and pronounced dead at just 42 years old. The news hit with a wave of sorrow and disbelief. Fans remembered the energetic boy who lit up their screens with humor and innocence, unaware of the suffering he carried behind the scenes. Friends and fellow actors spoke of his kindness, his resilience, and the quiet frustration he felt toward a body that had never given him a fair chance. Even in adulthood, Gary struggled with the medical consequences of his childhood treatments, the emotional weight of fame, and the relentless cycle of operations and complications that defined his life. His death served as a painful reminder that the battles some people fight are invisible, fought not in headlines, but in hospital rooms, recovery beds, and long nights of fear. Gary Coleman left behind a legacy of talent and perseverance, one shaped as much by the laughter he created as by the courage he showed in surviving as long as he did. Number 15. Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney Dangerfield spent his entire career turning pain into punchlines, transforming insecurity and hardship into the sharp, self-deprecating humor that made him a comedy legend. But behind the laughter was a man whose health had been deteriorating quietly for years. By the summer of 2004, Rodney's heart problems had grown too severe to ignore. Doctors recommended an aortic valve replacement, a high-risk surgery, especially for someone his age. Rodney, ever the performer, joked to reporters that his surgeon said he had a 1 in 100 chance of survival. "Those are the best odds I've ever had," he quipped with a grin. The operation took place at UCLA Medical Center. At first, everything seemed promising. Rodney was awake, talking, and still cracking jokes from his hospital bed. Nurses recalled him asking for martinis and pretending to request applause each time they entered the room. But beneath the humor, his body was fighting a losing battle. His age, previous surgeries, and fragile immune system made recovery a steep climb. Weeks after the procedure, complications set in: infection, fatigue, and a heart struggling to regain its rhythm. On October 5, 2004, after months of fighting, Rodney Dangerfield passed away at the age of 82. The comedy world mourned like never before. Johnny Carson had once called him one of the funniest men alive, and countless comedians, from rising stars to seasoned veterans, credited him as a mentor, a friend, and a pioneer who broke open the doors of modern stand-up comedy. Fans watched his old performances on late-night shows, laughing through tears at the brilliance that had shaped decades of American humor. Offstage, Rodney had carried heavy emotional burdens, an upbringing marked by neglect, a lifetime of anxiety, and a constant fear of not being good enough. Yet he transformed those wounds into art. His catchphrase, "I don't get no respect," became a symbol of his genius, a simple line that spoke of struggle while making the world laugh. His death after heart surgery was a somber reminder that even the brightest voices can fall silent in the sterile quiet of a hospital room. But Rodney Dangerfield's laughter never died. It echoes in every stand-up stage, every late-night rerun, every comic who delivers a punchline hoping for respect and hearing, in the back of their mind, the rhythm of a man who turned life's hardest blows into pure joy. In the end, every one of these stars walked into an operating room hoping for more time, more life, more dreams, more moments the world would remember. But fate had other plans. Their stories remind us that behind the fame, behind the cameras, behind the legends we admire, There is a fragile human heart that can stop without warning. If their journeys moved you tonight, let their memories live on. Like the video, share it with someone who loves Hollywood history, and subscribe to Behind Hollywood so you never miss the next shadowed story from the other side of fame.